You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
I guess my greatest memory from 1976 was my mother sticking a tricorn hat on me to carry a banner in a parade that I really had no choice. But it sparked an interest. And clearly, I followed that interest into the classroom and then into government. So I think that's what this semiquincentennial celebration and commemoration has the ability to do. And that's spark an interest.
Well, so here's the truth. I don't remember very much about it. I don't remember learning a whole lot from it. And that has inspired me. I mean, I remember fireworks and I remember all of that, but I don't remember being deeply impacted by it. Now, I have to say, I was a history and philosophy major in college, so I like to geek out on all this stuff, but it didn't make much of an impression. And I want this one all across the country, not just in Virginia, to make a deep impression on people.
Hello, and welcome to episode 427 of Ben Franklin's World, the podcast dedicated to helping you learn more about how the people and events of our early American past have shaped the present-day world we live in. And I'm your host, Liz Covart. As we look ahead to the 250th anniversary, or the semiquincentennial of the Declaration of Independence in 2026, communities and commissions across the United States are working hard to imagine how best to commemorate this historic milestone. But how should they balance celebration with education? And what work should they do to try and bring people together across political divides, generational gaps, and complex histories? To explore these questions, I've invited my friend, colleague, and co-founder of Clio Digital Media, Karin Wulf, to serve as our guest host. Karin is the director and librarian of the John Carter Brown Library and a professor of history at Brown University. Now, before moving to Rhode Island around 2023, Karin served on the Virginia 250 Commission. So she has been deeply involved with planning 2026 commemorations, and she knows firsthand what it takes to bring history into public view with thoughtfulness and impact. Now, in addition to our guest host, we have two great guests, leaders who are trying to shape the 250th and what it will look like at the state level. Carly Fiorina, National Honorary Chair of the Virginia 250 Commission and Chair of the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation Board, and Gregg Amore, the Secretary of State of Rhode Island and Chair of the Rhode Island 250 Commission. Now, during their conversation with Karin, Carly and Gregg reveal the educational and civic goals driving their state's commemorative plans for 2026, how local communities within their states are getting involved with grassroots history making, and the challenges and opportunities of uniting Americans around a shared revolutionary legacy in a politically divided moment. But first, I want to let you in on something really special that we've been building behind the scenes for our Ben Franklin's World community. Have you ever wondered how historians actually uncover the past? How they sift through fragments of letters, ledgers, and objects to piece together the lives of people who rarely left a clear trail? Or that moment when a historian discovers a clue that sparks a new understanding? Inside the History Explorers Club, you get to experience that thrill of discovery for yourself. Each month, we go behind the scenes with expert historians, some who you've met on this podcast, and some whose voices you won't encounter anywhere else. Together, we explore how the stories are made, how scholars question sources, follow hunches, and bring overlooked people and forgotten experiences back into view. I created the History Explorers Club for those of you who told me that you want to go deeper, not just into the history, but into the craft of uncovering it. So if you love understanding how we know what we know, this is your place. Now, membership to the History Explorers Club will reopen in mid-January, and we only open the doors a few times a year, so now is the perfect moment to join the waitlist, so you'll be the first to know when the doors reopen. You can join the History Explorers Club waitlist at historyexplorers.club. That's historyexplorers.club. All right, are you ready for an exploration of the work that state Revolution 250 commissions are doing? Let's go meet our guest host, Karin Wulf.
Hello, and welcome to Ben Franklin's World. I'm not Liz Covart. I'm Karin Wulf, Director and Librarian of the John Carter Brown Library and Professor of History at Brown University. I've been involved with Ben Franklin's World for a long time and now as a partner in Clio Digital Media, the nonprofit that Liz, Joe Edelman, and I started to do history work in the public interest, and that includes the podcast. I also have a longstanding interest in all things 2026. I've been involved in a variety of efforts to bring the history of the founding of the United States, including all things revolution, both to scholarly and public audiences. And both in my native state of Virginia, where I was at the Omohundro Institute and William and Mary for a long time, and in my new home state of Rhode Island. I'm hosting Ben Franklin's World today because of the opportunity to bring my two favorite states together to talk about the 250th. This is, I think, a remarkable opportunity to think about and to provide programming about the critical histories of early America and the early United States. I'm thrilled to be joined today to discuss this opportunity with Carly Fiorina, the National Honorary Chair of the Virginia 250 Commission, and Rhode Island's Secretary of State Gregg Amore, who chairs Rhode Island 250. In just a minute, I'm going to tell you more about each of them, but I want to let you, our listeners, know that I think you're in for a treat as we talk about how each of these two states and these two leaders are imagining the impact of the semiquincentennial and what they're seeing already as we ramp up activities for this commemorative year. Carly Fiorina is a leader in business with a commitment to our civic health. As the chair and CEO of Hewlett-Packard, she led the company to extraordinary success as the world's leading technology company. She founded Carly Fiorina Enterprises and the Unlocking Potential Foundation, just two of her vehicles for providing insight to leaders on problem solving in both the profit and nonprofit sectors. She's been equally attentive to civic matters, seeing in history a route to better mutual understanding. And she chairs the Board of Trustees at Colonial Williamsburg and is the honorary chair for Virginia 250. Gregg Amore is Rhode Island's 30th Secretary of State. A teacher, coach, and community volunteer for his entire adult life, Gregg taught AP U.S. History and U.S. Civics and Government at East Providence High School in the community where he was born and raised for 27 years. Gregg served in Rhode Island's House of Representatives for 10 years, and during his time as a state representative, he was a fierce advocate for public education, among other legislative areas of focus. He was recognized, for example, by Rhode Island school superintendents in 2021 for his commitment to schools, and he chairs Rhode Island's 250 Commission. I had the honor of serving on Virginia's 250 Commission for a couple of years before I moved to Rhode Island and have stayed connected to many of its efforts, and I appreciate so much the innovative work that's being done. So first of all, welcome to both of you, and let me start with a question to Carly. Carly, what do you see as the key goals of Virginia 250, and what are you most excited to see come to fruition?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you both. Thank you for having me, and I really look forward to this conversation. We have three goals, really. First, to educate people about who we are, where we come from, why we're a nation. Because what all the data says is that most Americans don't know much at all about our history. Our civics education has been in decline for a long time. And so we start with education, telling the whole story in an authentic way, a complete way. Our second goal is to engage with every community so that every Virginian, every American can see themselves in our history and understand how we are connected as citizens to this great story. And finally, while individual events and celebrations and commemorations are really important, and we're going to have awesome ones in Virginia, as I'm sure they're going to have in Rhode Island, in the end, what this really is about, I think, is to spark a season of civic renewal, to have people come out of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and say, I understand what being a citizen means. I understand why our country is a country, and I understand why, despite all our imperfections and faults, this remains an absolute, unique human experiment that has changed the world.
Thank you so much. That's very inspiring. So one of the many joys of living in Rhode Island is getting to know the community of folks committed to history and history education. And what better time than in anticipation of the semiquincentennial. Gregg, I wondered if you would share a little bit about Rhode Island's goals for the semiquincentennial.
Thank you for having me, Karin, and I'm happy to be on with Carly. And it's appropriate because the Washington-Rochambeau Revolutionary Route started in Newport, Rhode Island and ended in Yorktown, Virginia. We are connected in many ways, including Roger Williams' connection to Thomas Jefferson with the separation of the wall of church and state. And so it's appropriate that we're here together. And I think what Carly expressed is what we hope to do as well. First, educate our citizenry around this enormous chance to talk about why this document is so important, not only to our history, but to the history of the world. And then to engage our citizens in a way that makes them proud to be Rhode Islanders, makes them proud to be Americans, and also gives them the chance to think about this in a broader perspective. And so, yes, I agree. We're going to engage in many special events, but I think the thing we're most proud of is our professional development for educators, which you have been involved in, Karin. We appreciate that. We've had hundreds of educators representing every school district in the state, private schools, parochial schools, charter schools, who are coming together and learning about American history and Rhode Island's role in that history. And I like to say, and you've heard me say this, that Rhode Island history is a microcosm of the nation's history. And so we're bringing enthusiastic teachers together to learn about this, give them tools to teach this. And that's how we think this will have a lasting impact beyond July 4th, 2026.
Well, you've both demonstrated exactly why these are the two best states. I might be slightly biased, my two favorites. So, Carly, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how Virginia has been working in concert with other state commissions and with other states that are taking up these opportunities.
So we like to say, and Gregg will take issue with this, no doubt, but we like to say that America was made in Virginia. And we say that because Virginia is the birthplace of the nation. It is where the first colonists arrived. It is where the first ships carrying the enslaved landed. It is where the first representative government occurred. And of course, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution were all written by Virginians, and General Washington was a Virginian. So I start with that not to brag about Virginia, but to say, as the birthplace of the nation, we feel we have to play a leadership role, just as Virginia did 250 years ago. So Virginia, of course, was the oldest colony, the richest colony, the most politically influential and powerful colony. So it was a gathering place. And so we have been a gathering place as well for the last 3 years. We have hosted at Colonial Williamsburg all of the state commissions from around the country, as well as over 100 historic institutions from all around the country as well. And we began that process in 2023 to begin to build relationships, collaboration, and to start talking about what does this mean? How can we work together to have the 250th be more than fireworks? Fireworks are great. By the way, Virginia was the first place to use fireworks in celebration. I'm just saying. But it has to be more than fireworks. And so this has sparked wonderful ideas for how to get people engaged across many states. It sparked a lot of collaboration around civics curriculum throughout the country. So that is how we have been gathering people together. We've learned a lot. We've met a lot of great friends. And I think there have been already many programs that have been national in scope, such as something called Two Lights for Tomorrow, where people hang two lights in commemoration of Paul Revere's ride. I know it was done in the State House in Rhode Island. It was done all across the country. That idea was born at one of these gatherings, which we call a common cause. There were two lights in the International Space Station commemorating Paul Revere's ride. So that's pretty cool. It's not just across the country. It's in outer space.
That's great. Gregg, Rhode Island is a small but mighty state with an intense culture of historical preservation and community engagement around its many diverse histories. One of the things that has so struck me is the way that Rhode Island 250 is really working at this unbelievably, wonderfully local level with so many communities around the state. I'm just thinking of a kind of parallel about Two Lights. I was thinking about the Liberty Tree Initiative and some of these other initiatives. I wondered if you could talk about how Rhode Island 250 is working in communities, like really, really at the grassroots level.
One of the first initiatives we engaged in was making sure that each of our 39 cities and towns, and I know that sounds quaint, but 39 cities and towns each had their own semiquincentennial commission, and they do. And we are working closely with those cities and towns on programming that support the overall effort that the Rhode Island 250 Commission is engaged in, but also focus on the impact of those cities and towns and the people who lived in those places in the 18th century. And we are proud to say that all of those cities and towns, whether they were incorporated prior to or post, have a revolutionary history to tell. And that's important to us. And so we are planting Liberty trees. We're using the Rhode Island red maple, our state tree, in each one of these cities and towns in locations that will be accessible to the public with a plaque that explains what this semiquincentennial remembrance and commemoration is all about. We've received great support from throughout our state. And I say this often, it does not matter what your political point of view is. The Liberty Tree celebrations and commemorations and the plantings that we attend are really about what we share as Americans. They are not about our differences. They're about the foundational principles we celebrate in the Declaration of Independence. And so we've learned a lot from those convening of the states. We've learned a lot from our partners around the country, including Virginia. I was happy to be at Colonial Williamsburg for that meeting. We know that this works better when we're sharing ideas and when we can share our resources with our partners in this effort. And just to point out that I don't have any disagreement with Carly's analysis of the history, but I would say the first fireworks of the American Revolution were in 1772 when the Gaspee was burned, starting the revolt.
One thing I really appreciate about this conversation is that this is not Boston or Philadelphia talking about firsts and claims. It's much better to listen to Virginia and Rhode Island. Love it. Carly, could we turn to young people in particular? A really important focus, I think, for a lot of folks who are planning for the semiquincentennial. And can you talk a little bit about what you think are some of the key opportunities for young people to get involved or to feel the experience of 2026?
Yes. So first, like Gregg and the great work he's describing in Rhode Island, we have taken the opportunity in Virginia to relook at our civics curriculum and our history curriculum, particularly for K through 12. The Secretary of Education convened a broad bipartisan group of experts. That civics curriculum is now complete and being rolled out, and that's a wonderful legacy project. Secondly, we pioneered something that we call the mobile museum. It is in a semi-tractor trailer. It is mobile. It is a meticulously researched story of the American founding. And it travels because we want to make sure that we go to where young people are. And so our mobile museums, we have 2 of them on the road, and we will visit every single middle school in Virginia by the end of the semiquincentennial. And the experience when you walk into this trailer is really cool. It's very high tech. It's interactive. It is the complete history in an accurate way. Kids absolutely love it, and adults kind of love it too. So that's the second thing we're quite proud of. Third, one of the things that we did early on is to say, to get people excited and engaged in this, it can't just be about what happened. It also has to be a human expression. There has to be fun, food, dance, music. We've had essay contests. We've had poetry contests. And in every single one of our events, we highlight young people and ask them questions like, what does freedom mean to you? What does the 250th mean to you? Gotten wonderful things from young people. We participate in the Civics Bee that the U.S. Chamber sponsored. So all of these things are very specifically dedicated to making sure that young people are engaged. One final point, if I may, one of the things that we do at each of our events, it's a signature moment for us, is we're very fortunate to have 11 Virginia tribes here. Our tribes have ceremonial drumming at each of our events. We have West African drumming at each of our events, and we have fife and drum at each of our events. The heartbeat of freedom, we call that, all 3 cultures coming together. But in every single one of those drum groups, we see now as the years go on and we get closer to 2026, younger and younger drummers. So it's working.
That's neat. That's very neat. Gregg, I know you have thoughts and plans and programs around teachers and teaching and kids. I've seen this in action. You're definitely still a teacher, by the way. Anyone who sees you in action knows that for sure. What do you think we could be doing, or what are you most excited about doing to encourage kids' enthusiasm and connection to the semiquincentennial?
I'm our mobile museum. I plan to be in over 50 classrooms throughout the semiquincentennial lead up. We've already started that in a Warwick High School, very close to where the Gaspee was burned on purpose. And I am presenting a really fast-paced 35-minute lesson on the Declaration of Independence and Rhode Island's role in the founding of the nation. And this is interactive with students across the board, public, private, parochial schools, where they're getting a little taste in a condensed way of what this is about. And then we finish that lesson with our introductory video for RI-250, which will appear across the state to try to draw enthusiasm around this commemoration. But I think this is the key, right? I remember being 9 years old in 1976. My dad was actually on the Bicentennial Commission here in Rhode Island. And I remember how enthusiastic we were to be involved in our local parades and events. And we're trying to reignite that passion around what it means to be an American. Again, I keep going back to that theme because we're a divided nation at this point politically, but we should really talk about what unites us. And I think this gives us a great opportunity to talk about something that is not controversial. Those self-evident truths are not controversial, that we are all created equal, that we are endowed with unalienable rights. These are things that we can hang our collective hat on as Americans. And this is the type of enthusiasm we're bringing into the schools. We plan on being in literally hundreds of classrooms over the course of the next year.
Well, I'll take you as our mobile museum anytime, Greg. Let me just say.
Yeah, he's pretty great. It's amazing. I got to see a teacher workshop last week, and it was really a lot of fun. So I know both of you have seen clips from Ken Burns' documentary that will air on PBS starting November 16th. Ken's been in Williamsburg, and just last week he was here in Providence for a couple of days. What do you think about how the documentary can help support your efforts? Gregg, you've just seen Ken literally days ago, so I wondered if you wanted to go first on this.
Sure. And we were incredibly fortunate because he took the time to meet with our Rhode Island civic leadership students representing 60 high schools across the state and take questions from them after they saw a preview of the American Revolution. As an educator, I used a lot of Ken Burns clips to support my teaching in the classroom over 27 years. So I know how valuable this will be to teachers. I think what Ken Burns is able to do, that all of us want to do in this effort, is draw attention to what it meant for this nation to be born under the principles that it was born. And I think he does a fantastic job of telling an unvarnished history in this compilation, but also inspiring us. And we need some inspiration. And I think what I have gleaned from this production, and I've seen all of the Ken Burns films, is that he does just that. He tells us what we need to know while at the same time inspiring us, appealing to our better angels, as Lincoln would have said.
Would you agree with that, Carly?
Yes, I certainly do. And I think the thing that Ken does, and we try to do this as well at Colonial Williamsburg, but Ken is, of course, in a class by himself. People hear the term history, and some people recoil. They think history is boring, it's abstract, it's a bunch of musty, fusty dates. Or they think, wow, it's too political, it's too scary. But people like stories. Ken Burns tells stories. And those stories draw you in. They're very human scale. I mean, these were amazing times, radical ideas, heroic acts, whether we'd know the names or not. And yet, they're very human scale stories. And so I think what happens is when people hear a story, number one, they can relate to it. Number two, they're interested in it. And number three, they remember it. And so I think when we're successful, it is, as Ken Burns would say, the story of us.
Both of you have kind of alluded to the complex political environment that we're in and that we'll be in when we celebrate the semiquincentennial on July 4th. In a long history of complicated, divided, super fraught politics in America, there's never been a moment when everybody was in agreement. And one of the things that I think Ken Burns does really beautifully in this documentary is show just how divided people were at the time of the revolution. It wasn't a foregone conclusion that the Patriots would be ascendant. There's certainly loyalists and a really strong and changing contingent of loyalists. And of course, people who are enslaved who feel that their freedom is better served under the British than the Patriots. There's a lot of complex stuff going on there. And even saying that about the revolutionary period, this is the one we're living in. And it feels a little intense. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how the intensity of the political environment might or might not be affecting how you think your states are approaching the semiquincentennial. Carly, I'm going to ask you to go first on this one.
Well, let me begin by saying that our commission is and has been since its inception rigorously, vigorously bipartisan and nonpartisan. And as Gregg, I'm sure, can attest, that takes real work. It takes real work to hold people together as the political intensity increases all around us. And yet we have done that. And we've done it in the same ways I think our founders did, by paying attention to what we agree on, paying attention to what our goals are. Our goals are to educate. Our goals are to engage. Our goals are to spark a season of civic renewal. And then listening to all points of view about how best to do this. It takes work, it takes time, and yet, of course, the outcome is always better. So that rigorous commitment to nonpartisanship and to bipartisanship has been incredibly important. The second commitment we have made is to be inclusive, to tell the whole story. And we have stuck with that. Not everybody perhaps is, but we are. And we have gained credibility, and people appreciate that. And the final thing I would say is, just as I made the comment that everybody likes a story and stories draw people in, I think the other thing that everyone likes, especially in this climate, is just straight talk about what are we actually doing, what actually happened, what actually are our goals. And so we will continue to do that. And the result is more and more people are engaging with our content and at our events. And I think they deeply appreciate, just as Gregg said, that at the end of all of this, whether it's his 35-minute lesson or the planting of a Liberty tree or the mobile museum or 35,000 people at Fort Monroe where the first slave ships arrived, people leave unified, uplifted, and inspired. It's like nutritious food after too much junk food in the politically toxic environment.
Liz can tell you that I talk about high protein content a lot, so I relate to that. Gregg, can you talk about that a little bit? How is the political climate affecting or not how you feel you guys are approaching the semiquincentennial?
I agree with a lot of what Carly mentioned, and we've engaged in that type of thoughtful processing of this commission's work. And I would say that what's interesting to me is I think this effort, the semiquincentennial, comes around right at the perfect time because it forces us to realize that this is a long story, that it's an ever-changing story, that the end has not been written, and that we have struggled throughout our history. I guess I benefit from having the same perspective you do in studying the nation's history and teaching it for so long, that I know that we have been more divided, that I know that some of this vitriol that we are seeing is nothing compared to what we saw in the Vietnam era or the McCarthyism era. And so I try to focus on the broad story and telling that story. And to Carly's point, we have tried to focus on the story of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment because it's a unifying story. The first integrated regiment in the American Revolution, really in the United States military history, where you had almost half of the unit were Black and Indigenous soldiers fighting on 2 levels for their freedom. The freedom based on the nation's quest to break away from Great Britain, fighting for their liberties and their own personal liberties. And I think it's hard for people not to connect with that story. These were not the merchant class. This was not the educated elite. These were everyday Rhode Islanders who were sharing in some of the most traumatic experiences of their lives. And they fought with distinction at some of the major battles, including at Yorktown, where they attacked Redoubt number 10. So this story appeals to so many people, and then they can make a connection to that story. And I think that's the way we avoid the political tensions that exist in the nation now.
Thank you both so much for those thoughtful answers here and just kind of reflections on how we think about history and contending with history in our current moment.
Actually, Karin, Gregg, why don't we hit pause for a second so that we can thank our episode sponsors? What would it take to look at early America with fresh eyes? In each episode of Ben Franklin's World, we explore the people who built the United States. Not just the famous statesmen whose portraits hang in our museums, but the cooks, sailors, midwives, immigrants, diplomats, and the dreamers who lived the history we've inherited. Now, the team and I search for the stories that help us understand who we are, how we got here, and what parts of the past we may have overlooked. This kind of work, the careful, curious, inclusive kind, exists because you make it possible. Today is Giving Tuesday, so before we go any further, I would like to thank a few listeners whose recent support helped bring this very episode to life. Haley A., Cindy B., Michael J., Regina K., and Alfred M. Your generosity keeps this show freely available to everyone who wants to learn more about our shared past. So thank you. Thank you for supporting this really important work and for helping it be accessible to everyone. Ben Franklin's World is produced by Clio Digital Media, a small nonprofit powered entirely by you, our community. Every donation, whether it's $5 or $100, helps us bring more voices to the microphone, spotlight more overlooked histories, and share more of the scholarship that makes early America feel human, complicated, and alive. And because Clio Digital Media is a 501c3 nonprofit, your gift is fully tax deductible. So if you believe that history should include everyone's story, I hope you'll consider supporting the show today, on Giving Tuesday, and beyond. Please visit benfranklinsworld.com/donate. That's benfranklinsworld.com/donate. And thank you. Thank you for helping us build a more curious, connected, and historically grounded world. Okay, Karin and Gregg, it's time to go back to your conversation.
Can I ask you a slightly more personal question, which is, what do you remember and what did you take away from the bicentennial? Gregg, you mentioned briefly, but do you feel a kind of sense of legacy from the bicentennial that you have either a sense that you want to replicate or that you want to do differently or you want to see done differently in the semiquincentennial year?
I think our effort, and we have members on our commission who were on the commission in 1976. In fact, one of the members on our commission was the chair of the commission in 1976. So we have a direct line. We know what it looked like, and we've been educated and informed on that. I think our effort is more inclusive than the 1976 effort, and Carly talked about that as well. And I also think our effort really tries to tell the stories as connected to the localities. So we want to try to bring in all parts of Rhode Island to tell this story. I guess my greatest memory from 1976 was my mother sticking a tricorn hat on me to carry a banner in a parade that I really had no choice. But it sparked an interest. And clearly, I followed that interest into the classroom and then into government. So I think that's what this semi-quincentennial celebration and commemoration has the ability to do, and that's spark an interest.
Well, so here's the truth. I don't remember very much about it. I don't remember learning a whole lot from it. And that has inspired me. I mean, I remember fireworks and I remember all of that, but I don't remember being deeply impacted by it. Now, I have to say, I was a history and philosophy major in college, so I like to geek out on all this stuff, but it didn't make much of an impression. And I want this one all across the country, not just in Virginia, to make a deep impression on people. Because as the only nation on the face of the earth and in all of human history, not founded on territory, religion, ethnicity, or tribe, we are the only nation in human history founded on ideas, ideals, principles, and a system of government. When we lose touch with those, and the data says we are, then we don't know why we're a country anymore. And while we've always been divided, if we don't know why we're a country and we don't know what citizenship means and what a privilege it is, then we're having a different kind of identity crisis. And so for me, this commemoration, I want it to be deeply impactful so that people have really aha moments. That's why it's the United States of America. That's what being a citizen really means.
So let me go at this question slightly different way, which is, Carly, you've just articulated your biggest kind of ambitions, in a sense, like really big ambitions for this. What do you think are the things that are standing in your way? What are the biggest obstacles or challenges to achieving that?
Well, let's just start with awareness. We've been talking about all these great things that we're doing and Rhode Island is doing and Gregg is doing, and we're doing great things. And yet we know, because we've done surveys, that still around 70% of Virginians don't know very much about this at all. And so we now are investing in a real marketing campaign. We're putting real money behind getting people amped up that something is coming so that they're aware, and we connect them to local events close to where they are. We have Rhode Island's local commissions, your citizen towns. It's so inspiring. We have 134 localities in Virginia, and they each have their commissions. So we're connecting people up through this marketing campaign. Awareness is our biggest issue right now. And then secondly, I would say once people are aware and we have some great content, we need them to show up, to engage so that they can learn something and be impacted. I'm very confident we can solve this problem with the right content, the right message, which we have, and spending the money that needs to be spent. But awareness and apathy, or ignorance and apathy, are our biggest obstacles right now.
Gregg, what do you think? Ambitions and challenges.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think engagement is the challenge now. I'm hopeful because we've seen an uptick in attendance at all of our events, both local and statewide, as we get closer to July 4th, 26. So I'm hopeful, but we have had to do the same thing. We've had to engage in a marketing campaign that puts this front and center. We're going to show our video at local collegiate athletic contests. We're going to try to force feed people into saying, oh, I recognize that now. How can I get involved, or where can I go? And I think Carly would agree with this. I think the major events are going to be well attended, but there's so much around the education aspect of this where so many people can benefit by connecting with programming. That is the great challenge. That and the name of this, the semiquincentennial, is challenging as well. It was much easier to say bicentennial. But yeah, that's our greatest challenge.
Thank you. I spent some time before our conversation looking at lovely videos on each of your websites, and they're terrific, and they're definitely very inspiring, and they've got information about events. I'm wondering if you have a sense about what people are most responding to in your marketing or in your communications. Like, are there specific messages that people are hearing and responding to, or are you not able to tell yet at this point? After all, we're in the fall of 75 here. Oh, wait, no, 2025. If we're doing on this day. But anyway, we're just in the fall of 2025. So we haven't even started the year 2026. What are people responding to now? And what do you think they're going to start responding to as we actually hit the moment? Gregg, let me start with you.
What we found is that Rhode Islanders are responding to things that are a sense of pride for them. So when we can connect them to their past, they are responding. And we see that in our programming, and we see that in our social media clicks. When they can connect Nathaniel Greene to their state and learn that he was a Quaker who gave up his religious beliefs to become a fighting Quaker, and where they learned that he came from the very bottom of the militia system to be a major general in the Continental Army, that appeals to them. And they know the name because there are schools and streets and places named for Nathaniel Greene here in Rhode Island. We're seeing that connection. We're seeing people make those connections. So I think that's what we notice, but we know for sure as the semiquincentennial date approaches, people will be engaged in all of the events around that. And they're the celebratory events, not the education events that we talked about earlier.
Carly, can I ask you a slightly different version of this same question about what you think people are responding to? Because one of the things that strikes me about both Rhode Island and Virginia, such lovely places, is that both places have a kind of deep historical culture, but also both places have benefited so much from immigrants over hundreds of years, and particularly just in the last generations. So they're not always places where we can count on people thinking, this is about me per se, or my family necessarily. But definitely, this is about the place where I live now. And I'm wondering if there are ways in which you see people responding to your marketing and your communications in that dynamic.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to pick up on a word that Gregg used, pride. We have a 60-second video called America Made in Virginia. You don't hear that until the very end. It is a beautifully produced video. It introduces people to some of the most iconic figures and places in Virginia. Some of those iconic figures people may not have heard of. Gowan Pamphlet, James Armistead Lafayette. Others they might have heard of. Pocahontas, Thomas Jefferson. But in 60 seconds, we sort of show them the sweep of their beautiful commonwealth and some of these important revolutionary figures. And we end with America Made in Virginia. There is no better time to reconnect with your country than now. What we know, because we measure this, is 99% of people who start that video finish it all the way to the end. And that 99% is an extraordinary number. So we know that as they are drawn into this, that not only are they interested, but we know as well that they are proud and they're learning something. And then, of course, we can direct them to, look, you have this event coming up. Here's your local commission member. Did you know this? So sometimes people are afraid of history because they think, oh, some of these stories are difficult. I have watched people learn extremely difficult stories. And in every single case, people walk away thoughtful, inspired by, if nothing else, the resilience and the courage that that story implies, and feeling differently about who they are as an American.
Thank you. I think when people know that their own lives are complex and multi-layered and textured, and they don't think that a kind of flat, single-dimensional perspective on history can possibly be true. So when you give them the full story, it's a bit of relief, right? That those are actual people living actual lives, making tough decisions day in and day out, sometimes making good ones, sometimes making bad ones, sometimes being heroic, and sometimes being awful because humanity. So I agree.
It's so true. If I may jump in, one of the things I said recently in a speech was, I'm paraphrasing now, but we find out when we learn all these stories, we find out that these people were not so different from ourselves. And that's inspiring, actually.
I agree. I think it's comforting, actually. And it tells us that we can do things in our own lives. Like we can make choices too. We can make commitments too. So I have two last questions for you. The first one, what do you think you'll be experiencing and feeling on July 4th, 2026?
Relief.
Anticipating arrest.
Yeah. When I ran for Secretary of State, I knew this was part of the portfolio, but I didn't know how much of our time it would entail. But this is a labor of love for me. I happen to be a history teacher in this office, so it works out. I hope we serve the story well. And I hope that Rhode Islanders, when we come to July 4th, 2026, say, okay, I know more about myself as a person, as an American, as a Rhode Islander. I know more about the history of my state and of the nation, and I'm hopeful. We very rarely talked about Dr. King when we talk about the Declaration of Independence, but he called it a promissory note. And that's what it is. And when Ken Burns was here, he and I talked about that document providing capacity, right? The words in that document provide us with capacity to do way more than we could ever imagine as a people.
Carly.
I think I will feel very proud of all of the efforts of so many people. I think I'll be very excited during the actual set of events. It has been a privilege, in addition to a labor of love, as Gregg said, it has been a privilege to do this work. And so I think that there will be a sense of satisfaction on hope many people's parts that as citizens, it is our job to help form a more perfect union. I think this is part of that work. And so I hope we all feel a sense of satisfaction that the work must be ongoing, but this part of the work has been done well.
Nice. Thank you both. I have one last question for you, which is, what do you think happens next? Because, the Revolution was a long war. With the Battle of Yorktown conclusive in 1781, the Treaty of Paris is not signed until 1783. And we know that there's a new constitution just a handful of years later as the first government actually collapses. So even the history of the revolution itself is long. Do you see kind of continuing opportunities or even responsibilities starting on July 5th? Okay, maybe July 6th. Gregg.
Yeah, in fact, our commission will extend beyond the end of the semiquincentennial per se. And because we're Rhode Island, we have to focus on the Battle of Rhode Island, where the French first supported the American troops. And that's a year out. So we have work to do beyond that. And I think one of the foundational things that we've done here is we have provided educators with professional development that will serve them around this topic, but also around the early days of the Republic and the Constitutional Convention. And I know our office is going to continue to lean into that. And I know we have great support from Brown University, where you are deeply involved in the Brown 2026 effort. You're the co-chair. And so I know that will not be forgotten as we go forward.
Yes, very similarly, the actual official name of the Virginia 250 Commission is the American Revolution Commission 250, and it extends through the Battle of Yorktown and beyond. And so I hope that the semiquincentennial becomes a launching pad, really. As I said, sparks a season of civic renewal. And that season of civic renewal means that we continue to educate ourselves. We continue to engage with one another. We continue to lean into understanding more about what citizenship means and how we as citizens can do our work, make our choices every day to help form a more perfect union. That is an ongoing human experiment.
Thank you both so much for being in this conversation. Good history makes for good civics. And I think you both demonstrated that so beautifully. Thank you for taking time from your busy schedules to talk about the semiquincentennial with Ben Franklin's World.
Great pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
That was a fascinating conversation, wasn't it? And it's a conversation that offers us a powerful reminder that historical commemorations are as much about the future as they are about the past. As Carly and Gregg shared, the 250th anniversary of the United States' independence presents us with an opportunity, not just to mark the event as a milestone, but to invest in civic learning, local storytelling, and national reflection. From mobile museums in Virginia to Liberty tree plantings in Rhode Island, these state commissions are really engaging Americans in meaningful, place-based ways that bring the revolution home to them. They also remind us that the revolution was never a simple or unified event. It was complex and contested, and it was shaped by people with differing and often conflicting ideas about freedom. So remembering that complexity is really part of how we'll move forward with honesty and purpose. And it's also one way for us to think about how we might move through our own present-day political divides. Now, you'll find more information about Karin, Carly, and Gregg, the Rhode Island and Virginia State Revolution 250 commissions, plus notes, links, and a transcript for everything we talked about today on the show notes page. benfranklinsworld.com/427. If you found today's episode interesting, please share it with your friends. After all, friends tell friends about their favorite podcasts. Production assistance for this podcast comes from Joseph Edelman, Karin Wulf, and Morgan McCullough. Breakmaster Cylinder composed our custom theme music. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. To discover and listen to their other podcasts, visit airwavemedia.com. Finally, how would you like to see your community commemorate the 250th anniversary of the United States' independence? I'd love to know how you think we should mark the Revolution 250 commemorations, so please share your thoughts with me. Liz at benfranklinsworld.com.